complex figure. His stature in history will be examined, re-examined many, many times down the road. His end goal is not to dismantle the rule of the Chinese Communist Party. Never was. The Chinese reform, it was able to keep stability, but it has not really fundamentally changed the political system.
Deng and Gorbachev were two reformers who set out to rescue socialism. But they were on two different paths. While Deng focused on overhauling the economy, Gorbachev turned his attention to the political system.
Gorbachev in 1987 did face a choice. He came to the point where he either had to retreat to essentially neo-Stalinism of the Brezhnev era and pray that there would be enough political stability for him to serve out his term, or he had to radicalize his approach. Nobody at the time, say early 1987, had any idea that this would lead to a revolution.
In a way, it had come full circle. Here Lenin had revised Marx, Karl Marx, who believed that the proletariat was naturally socialistic and would make a revolution, and Lenin, who had a politics based on the absence of trust. And now Gorbachev flips and is completely the opposite from Lenin, and saying that we have to trust the people. Otherwise, we have no socialism and we have no Soviet regime.
Gorbachev now spoke often about glasnost, a word that meant openness. The Soviet people were now free to talk about subjects that had long been forbidden. The nation soon found itself awash in a flood of revelations about the crimes of Joseph Stalin. But glasnost didn't stop there.
Contrary to what Gorbachev expected, they quickly disposed with Stalinism. They started talking, they went back all the way to Lenin, who to Gorbachev at that time was an icon. And they quickly began to discover how unjust, how inequitable, how stupid economically the entire regime was. It was no longer Stalinism that was to blame. It's the entire system of one-party dictatorship based on the total ownership of economy by the state. Glasnost became it was a match, a burning match thrown in the pool of gasoline, and that all that's required was just giving it enough time to burn it.
General Secretary Gorbachev, if you seek peace, if you seek prosperity for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, if you seek liberalization, come here to this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate.
Under pressure from both within and without, the momentum of change accelerated.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
In March 1989, the Soviet Union held the first free parliamentary elections in its history.
A lot of communist bigwigs were just sort of kicked out. And some young faces, engineers, doctors, philosophers, journalists, suddenly became MPs, members of parliament.
But 1989 had only gotten started. Poland was the first domino to fall. Solidarity, the independent trade union, had managed to survive underground through the 1980s. Faced with rising discontent, the Polish communists finally gave in to demands for parliamentary elections.
there were free elections held, but there was a trick, which was there were certain seats that were supposed to be guaranteed for the government, which the opposition was not allowed to run against. And yet, it may be the only time in history that candidates ran unopposed and still lost.
Voters simply crossed the communists' names off the ballot. Meanwhile, Solidarity had captured 99 out of 100 seats in the new Senate. All the while, Moscow stood by in silence.
The Polish events had a huge effect on the Soviet Union. To see people like us doing something completely different, just standing up and opposing, that was something people couldn't believe. We couldn't believe it was happening on our doorstep. And in this respect, the victory of Solidarity-led coalition in parliamentary elections in June 1989 was something that started the final stage of the collapse of what was called the Eastern Bloc. Next year, the Warsaw Pact was gone.
Magyar Köztársaság!
Many of the Soviet republics began to assert their independence, while Gorbachev struggled to lay the groundwork for a post-Soviet Union of sovereign states. But a group of hard-line communist aides had had enough. In August 1991, they launched a coup and placed Gorbachev under house arrest. Tanks and troops appeared on the streets of Moscow. At the time, Konstantin Eggert was a newspaper reporter in Moscow.
Well, I rushed off to my editorial office in a city newspaper, and it was this feeling of, oh yeah, we know, here they come. We know what they're going to do. They're not going to spare anybody.
Then something remarkable happened. Hundreds of thousands of citizens poured the streets to resist. Many of the soldiers joined them.
When it really went, not with a bang, but with a whimper. Nothing happened. Just all these mighty armies, KGB, all those people held sway over the country for 70 years. They just hid. Just ran away. There was nobody to defend it. It was a system without defenders.
In the middle of it all was Boris Yeltsin, the newly elected president of the Russian Federation. His popularity had now eclipsed Gorbachev's. After the coup collapsed, it was Yeltsin who issued a decree that effectively outlawed the Communist Party. In the following months, the Russian republics voted one by one to declare their independence. On Christmas Day, 1991, Mikhail Gorbachev resigned as leader of the disintegrating Soviet Union. The once fearsome communist power was no more.
When I think about the fate of socialism, and when I think about the fate of socialism in other countries where it still supposedly exists, for example, China, I always remember this 1980s experience in Russia. You go to a small corner, very quiet, and whisper there, freedom. And suddenly it echoes all over the place, freedom, 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 and you can't stop it. It's like an avalanche. That's my impression of this era.
With the fall of the Soviet Union, the era of totalitarian socialism effectively came to a close. But did the collapse of communism